Hello, everybody. This is an introduction on a bonus episode of the Oversteer podcast. I had the immense honor and pleasure to talk with Matt Bishop. Matt is the current head of communications on the W Series, the all-women single-seater series that has been around since 2018. And on the past, he was editor-in-chief on F1 Racing, the all F1 magazine back in the day, and of course for 10 years, from 2008 to 2017, he was the head of communications at the McLaren F1 team during their troubled years with Spygate, Lightgate, and the Honda tenure. We talked all about this. It was a brief but very enjoyable episode, and we hope you enjoyed it as well. So, without further ado, here is the bonus episode of the Oversteer podcast with Mr. Matt Bishop. In this episode of the Oversteer podcast, we have and the honor to have Matt Bishop, head of communications in the W Series, and motorsport journalist, a novel writer. uh, Matt, thank you so much for coming to our podcast.
You're very welcome, and I'm very pleased to be involved.
So, we are on a limited time schedule, so let's begin with the very first topic I wanted to talk about, which is that a lot of people did get to know you from the McLaren days, the years that you were on the McLaren communications team. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. I was communications director for 10 years.
And after that, you did a hiatus from the motorsport community and you got back on the game with the W Series, or did I miss something?
No, look, basically what happened, I started work as a journalist in the early 90s in Formula One. And I was the editor of F1 Racing magazine, which was the world's best-selling Formula One magazine from 1996 to 2007. And in 2007, Ron Dennis hired me to McLaren as director of communications. And I spent, he hired me at the end of 2007, and I started on the 2nd of January 2008. And I worked at McLaren through Spygate and Lightgate and Lewis Hamilton's first world championship and the hiring of Jenson Button and Checo Perez and Kevin Magnussen and Stoffel Van Dorn and all the rest of it. Sorry, I forgot Heikki Kovalainen as well in all of that. And then I left McLaren in the middle of 2017 after 9.5 years. I then took about 8 months off regular work and I wrote a novel, The Boy Made the Difference, nothing to do with motorsport, nothing to do with Formula One. And then in early 2018, so just about 2.5 years ago, David Coulthard, whom of course I knew very well, asked me to join W Series also as communications director. And that's what I've been doing since.
About the McLaren years, you admitted that you were on the team on the aftermath, I should say, of the Spygate, of course, the really tough year for McLaren and the disqualification from the Constructor Championship. You didn't live through the Hamilton-Alonso era, but how can you summarize to someone that was on the outside looking on the inside these really troubling years for the McLaren team?
Well, of course, I did live through the Alonso-Hamilton year of 2007, but as a journalist reporting on the McLaren team very closely. But I had actually grown quite friendly and quite close to Ron Dennis, the McLaren boss, some years before. In fact, Ron first offered me a job in 2001, but it wasn't the right job, but we stayed close. And finally, what then happened, of course, is that everything broke down in 2007. The relationship between the two drivers broke down. Fernando Alonso, obviously a brilliant driver, but he was not happy to see a rookie matching him, sometimes beating him. And he began to feel, rightly or wrongly, and I personally would say wrongly, that perhaps he thought this young British driver was being favoured by this British team and all the British people in it. It wasn't a surprising thing that he might feel in his discomfort and surprise at having been matched and sometimes beaten by the rookie, but I don't think it was necessarily correct. I know that team now very, very well, McLaren. I know Ron very well, and all Ron ever wanted to do was win. And he didn't care whether Senna won or Prost won, and he wouldn't have cared whether Hamilton won or Alonso won. Anyway, it all broke down. And then, of course, the relationship not only between the two drivers broke down, but between Alonso and the team broke down. And we saw that in Hungary, particularly. And it was very stressful. And then, of course, yes, when the $100 million fine was levied by the FIA on McLaren for incorrect possession in the hands of their chief designer, Mike Coughlin, of 780 pages of Ferrari technical drawings, yes, that was a big, big problem. And Ron came to me, or rather he asked me to join him in his office in the brand centre, the McLaren brand centre, on the Thursday of the Turkish Grand Prix weekend. And he said, Matt, I know I've offered you a job before. This time it's a serious, we need a strategic communications director, because the FIA has the very capable Richard Woods, who was working very closely with Max Mosley, the then president. And of course, Ferrari has the very capable Luca Colliani, who was working very closely with Jean Todt, the then team principal. So in the end, I did join. I obviously had to do some gardening leave. I wasn't able to start immediately. But when I arrived in January 2008, really the task was rebuilding a team that was struggling, had just survived, had to pay a $100 million fine. Not every team could, but McLaren could, but it was difficult. And then the next task was to keep the team together, rebuild the brand, rebuild confidence in the team, both internally among the drivers, which of course by that time were Hamilton still and Kovalainen, but also the press, the fans, the sponsors. And that was a major job. And obviously I was central to a small team that was leading that process and a big team that made it happen. And I was proud to be involved in it. And I have to say, the team spirit that I encountered that enabled us to make that job doable and in fact finally done, because we actually won the World Championship, of course, or rather Lewis won the World Drivers' Championship in 2008, and that's still the highlight of my career.
Since you lived through both the 2008 and the Honda era of the modern Honda era of McLaren, which one do you think was the worst internally for the team to handle or to cope with the spygate or the struggles with the Japanese manufacturer?
I think 2015, 2016 and 2017 were difficult years, obviously, with Honda, particularly those years. And 2015 was a very big disappointment because it was so poor and Honda was not ready. But look, I will be honest, McLaren also, it wasn't only a question of the power unit. It was also the chassis, which was not as good as some of the others. So I think that was very uncomfortable and very frustrating. But I don't think it was approaching the levels of emergency that were necessarily the case in 2007. In 2007, I mean, the Queen Elizabeth II of England has a phrase, annus horribilis, of course, Latin for horrible year. And she said that she had a horrible year once. And 2007 was McLaren's annus horribilis. It was McLaren's horrible year. But the important thing is that McLaren survived it. And I was proud to be part of the team that pulled it out of that terrible year over the next few years. So, yes, I would say the second Honda phase was difficult, but it wasn't an emergency. 2007, that was a serious emergency, but luckily the team survived.
Before we move on, the W Series and your work there, and of course, what W Series stands for and tries to do in the motorsport community, I'd like to know from your perspective, uh, what do you, if you saw rather, in Lewis Hamilton in his very early days in McLaren, as you saw him winning the first championship and uh, many Grand Prix before he left, if you saw in the young version of him the potential to be a seven-time world champion in the next 14 years, we should say.
Well, I don't know that I said he would be a seven-time world champion. I didn't really think that anyone would ever match Michael Schumacher's extraordinary achievements. I don't think many people thought that. But actually, before even Lewis won the world championship, before he even got to Formula One, I certainly saw his remarkable potential. And by the way, I wasn't the only one. I remember being at the 2006 Turkish Grand Prix. And of course, Lewis was a GP2 driver at that time. And his performance in the GP2 race, I think coming from the back to, was it second? You can check the results. But I think he came from the back to second. An absolutely brilliant, storming race, overtaking people. And I remember the Formula One paddock gradually emptying as all the Formula One people went into their motorhomes to watch what this young man was doing. So that was already what made everybody sit up and take notice. And then in 2007, don't forget, Lewis was on the podium again and again and again at the beginning of his career. First time out in Australia, first Grand Prix on the podium. And then, of course, he won Grand Prix that year as well. Fantastic performance. And when he won, I think, in Canada, which was his first Grand Prix, Canada 2007, his first Grand Prix win, even before then, I think at the time I was still, of course, it was my last year as editor of F1 Racing magazine. And I wrote an editor's letter, which is what we call the leader, the piece of writing by the editor at the beginning of the magazine on page 3. And I said, perhaps we are seeing the beginning of someone who may be classified as one of the greatest of all time. And in those days, we didn't have social media, but we did have internet forums. And a lot of people in internet forums said, Matt Bishop must be absolutely crazy to say after, 6 races, 6 Grand Prix, that this young man is already potentially among the best of all time. But I'm glad I wrote it, and I'm certainly now proved to be right, aren't I?
Yeah, of course. On the hindsight, of course you were, and many people, as you said, really point to that GP2 race in Turkey that he also has fond memories of. I think he proved himself there. So we should continue with the W Series topic that I think is. I have to tell you, I cover F1. I am very young. I'm 24 years old. I cover F1 professionally for the past 4 years. When I saw W Series forming and the first press releases and all the stuff that we got to know about this new series, I was really, really excited about the prospect of having so many young women drivers actually competing in the global stage and having uh, really good and really good support and really good foundations. And I believe that what W Series does is tremendous in terms of trying to promote young or not so young, if you want to say, for some drivers, but women drivers, talented women drivers with a very with merit, with a system that really seems to work. So my question to you for W Series is: do you believe that the work that you do as a series can potentially give us a woman F1 driver in the next few years, or do you think that everything has to be step by step and maybe we should wait a bit more for this breakthrough?
We want W Series to be successful in and of its own right. We want people to enjoy watching it. We want people, the young women, and as you say, some of them not so young women, to enjoy racing in it. But ultimately, what we really want is that our best drivers, our winners, our champions will go forwards and reintegrate in series such as FIA International Formula 3 or Formula 2, or perhaps one day, and I'm not going to make a prediction as to when, not next year, probably not the year after that, but perhaps in 3 years or 4 years or 5 years, then our best drivers, and it may even not be any of the drivers that are with us now. It might be a young woman who is now 15 and will join W Series in 2 years' time and will win the W Series championship in 3 years' time and will be in Formula One in 6 years' time when she is 21. It might be someone like that whom we don't even know. It might even be Juju Noda, Hideki Noda's daughter, the Japanese driver. I'm not predicting that. What I'm saying is it's probably likely to be a young teenage girl who will come to the fore having had a few years in W Series. And that's really what we want for W. We want it to be successful. We want it to be enjoyable. But really, our work will be done and we will have achieved what we've set out to do, our mission, if you like, if one day I will be able to say, Dimitris, look, there we are on the grid in Australia, and look at that driver in a Williams, or look at that driver in a McLaren, or look at that driver in an Aston Martin, or look at that driver in a Red Bull. There she is. And the last driver who actually started a World Championship Formula One race was Lella Lombardi, and that was 44 years ago. And there have been nearly 900 Formula One drivers in the 70 years of the existence of the Formula One World Championship. And it's always been open to men and women, but there have only ever been two that were not men. Lella Lombardi, as I say, and Maria Teresa de Filippis. And she was 62 years ago. So it's not getting better, it's getting worse. And that's why W Series has stepped in to do this deliberately disruptive thing to try to make a change. We have some critics, we certainly did 2 years ago. We don't have so many now because I think people now see what we're trying to do. And we're not trying to segregate women into a soft option series where they race each other. What we're actually trying to do is give women who wouldn't have had a chance to race at all an opportunity to race a top-class Formula 3 car on great circuits, to coach them, to teach them, to show them how to be racing drivers, to show them how to be fit, to show them how to work with engineers, to show them how to work with media, to show them how to do everything that a racing driver needs to do, so that one of them or two of them, or I don't know how many, but in one day at some point, one of them will push through and will be racing alongside, probably not Lewis Hamilton, he may have retired by then, but probably Max Verstappen.
In the past 2 weeks, I think, or the last week, I presume, we saw that W Series actually will be a support series for F1 in 2021. I believe that you had an agreement for this year's Mexican and US Grand Prix, but after their cancellation due to the pandemic, um, you seem to have a really good deal in place for 2021. And that must be a big accomplishment for you, not only on a W Series championship and organizing level, but uh, I I believe that it is a communications and uh, I don't know, an achievement that must rely, and I believe it relies on the fact that you have communicated this series pretty well, and you have made your stand, and as you said, you had critics, but now you don't have so many critics. So, do you share my belief on that? That the 2021 F1 Support Series deal is great on all levels for you.
Yes, certainly. It's great on all levels. And since you have ascribed some of its success or some of its causation to the fact of good communications and PR, obviously I'm going to agree with you, my dear friend, because you have just praised me. So I'm very happy with that. But seriously, it's a huge team effort. Well, it's a very small team, but it's a huge effort by that small team, led by Sean Wadsworth, the chairman, and Catherine Bond-Muir, the chief executive, but also Dave Ryan, the racing director, who, of course, I've worked with before many years at McLaren, and myself and many others who have done a really, I think, great job. David Coulthard, of course, as well, as the chairman of our advisory board, such a wise advisor, always available when required, and with a brilliant contacts book and such a strong influence in high levels. So look, yes, we are very pleased to have done the deal with Formula One. We think we want and intend that W Series will be bigger and better every year. As you say, it couldn't have happened this year. Even the mighty Olympic Games didn't occur this year, so little W Series was not able to either, but we will come back bigger and better next year. In 2019, we had 6 races in Europe only, and next year we will have 8 races, and it will be genuinely international.
What are the plans for the next year? Because since you didn't have a championship this year, which was unfortunate, um, I thought, or you will tell me if I was right or wrong, that you may have a bit of a financial problem or a commercial rights problem or anything like that. Are you okay in that respect in order to have a full blast on 2021 season despite the pandemic?
Well, actually, almost the opposite is true, because if we had raced this year, we weren't expecting to make a profit this year. We were expecting to make an operating loss this year, as we did in the first year, because it takes time to build up the necessary sponsorships. And our sponsors wanted to see how successful we were in year one. And if we had raced this year, I'm sure we would have had more sponsors. But obviously, when we decided not to race, the sponsors decided to keep their money and wait. And I'm sure you will see them appear for 2021. But of course, what actually happened is that instead of spending a lot of money going racing, we spent very little money not going racing. So, in fact, it wasn't a financial problem at all. It was a pity. It was a shame. We wanted to go racing. By the way, one thing I will say we did do is that we launched and ran the W Series Esports League. Now, prior to the resumption of motor racing, a lot of series did e-racing, esports. Of course, Formula One did, Formula E did, IndyCar did, many did. But I think, and I have to say this, I think that ours, W Series Esports League, was among the very best. First of all, we used iRacing, which I think is the best platform. And secondly, all our drivers took part. Every single one of our W Series drivers took part in the W Series Esports League. It was won by Baitskavisa, a brilliant performance, but other drivers did extremely well and won races. Marta Garcia, Ira Sidorkova, who was 16 at the time, she's now 17, one of our big prospects, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing how she will do next year in W Series on track in real life. But no, we were busy. 30 races we ran on the Series Esports League, and I would say this, wouldn't it? But I think it was the best esports series of all of the coronavirus lockdown.
Matt, we have to close out the podcast. Thank you so much for accepting the invitation and having this conversation with me. It was a brief one, but I really enjoyed it, and I hope you did too.
I did indeed, Dimitris. Thank you very much for inviting me.
It's been a pleasure. We will have to close out the podcast. Of course, it was a bonus episode. So, in Greek, again, we will have the normal consequence of the episodes next Tuesday. Until then, goodbye.